So this was the method of data collection I have followed. First one was in-depth interview of the subject. In-depth interview, sometimes it will take days, like 3-hour session, 4-hour session per day. So 3 to 4 days I used to meet these people, and after establishing a relationship with them inside the prison, and getting permission for the prison was a lot of job, and I'm not going there right now. And then interview with the close relatives of the subject. In 2 cases, the subjects were not alive, and one person was executed. That he was the last person who was executed in Kerala. And in that kind of cases, I cannot conduct this in-depth interview with the subject. So in that case, what I did is I have conducted interviews of their closest relatives alive, and tried to gather maximum information about their lives. And then interviews with acquaintances of the subject, friends or known people of the subjects throughout their life. Then interviews with police officers who investigated the cases. Interviews with co-prisoners of the subject. So co-prisoners can tell a lot about them, because they spent around 10 years, 20 years, they live together under the same roof. So they can give a lot of reliable information about these people, like what their lives, what is their present routine, or what do they like to do, and all these kind of information. And then interviews with officials of the prison where the subjects were confined. That was also seemed to be useful in some cases. Interviews with civil officials in the prison setup. And interviews with civil officials means, there were psychologists in the 9 central prisons in Tamil Nadu, and in 3 central prisons there were relationship officers in Kerala. Kerala doesn't have a permanent psychologist at the time when I were conducting the research. And interviews with the surviving victims. So few victims escaped from the clutches of the serial killers. There were not many, but there were few, and I could interview them. In those cases, victims were not there, victims are all dead, and I tried to manage to get in touch with some deceased victims' kin. That means the relatives of the deceased victim. So that gave me an idea of what was the victims' factors in those crimes. And then examinations of the crime scenes. So in some of the cases, crime scenes were very old, and that means I were going to the crime scene after 10 years of the murder. So, but that gave me a pretty good idea about the geography of the location, and geography might not have changed a lot. And then there were constructions. There was an open land in which crime taken place, but now there is a building. So in that case, it was not very, very useful. But in certain cases where I were able to visit the crime scenes within a matter of few days, in some crime scenes I were able to spot blood of the victims on the floor. And that kind of situations, that gave me a really good insight into the circumstances in which the crimes were taken place. And then observation of important places of the subject's life, like their the home in which they have grown, if the buildings were there. Otherwise, the places, the locations, the countryside or the city where they have grown up, the schools where they've been to, and a lot of places in their life they've been to. I try to visit most of the places. So this is how I have collected data. There were a lot of data by the end of the research. I didn't know how to manage the data, but anyway, I chronologically arranged the data from a third person's perspective, and I created biographies of 8 serial killers from India. So if you search for any Western serial, for example, Ted Bundy, he's a famous serial killer from US, and everyone knows his name, and there are movies produced on him, there are TV series on him, and so there are many books written about him. And if you search the name of Ted Bundy, you will get in Wikipedia, you will get a 10-page report. All of them are research based, and many so much data available on his birth, and who was his father and his mother, his bringing up, and all these informations are available. But if you search for an Indian serial killer, it is not available. The least information you will be receiving in internet is that he has committed these many murders, he was arrested on this date, and then there will be some over sensationalized data or articles written by medias, and which cannot be trusted as it is. Sometimes when there are no data, they will simply create data, and this is what available on Indian serial killers. At the same time, a well-researched Western serial killer will have at least 10 books written about them. And in that kind of situation, this is the imbalance of data, scientific data in India, which I wanted to create. So this 8 serial killers I have studied, I made at least 10 pages about their life in a narrative manner. That is what I have released recently as a book titled The Unfathomable Lives Biographies of Indian Serial Killers, which is available in Amazon. And now let's go into the theory. The theory proposes that the evolution of an individual into a serial killer is a lifelong process, and in certain manners goes beyond the life. Why it goes beyond the life? I'm not talking about afterlife or pre-life. What I'm suggesting is that in a figure of speech manner, we all live many lives through our parents, through our ancestors. That means even a baby who is just born, he is different. Some babies will cry if another person other than his mother who is going and taking, and some child will sit just like that. So even when a person is just an infant, he shows certain kind of key characteristics which are unique to that particular infant or particular person. So this is not something which he is acquired from the society or environment. That means he has certain born characteristics, and that is why I stated beyond the life. And this is also addressing the biological component of a person who is committing crimes. And so that is why I suggested that it is a lifelong process. A murder do not happen just like that. Most often we make the mistakes of analyzing a murder by just looking at that crime scene and what exactly happened in the crime scene. We see a crime scene, and in a crime scene we found a woman's dead body with no clothes, and there are bite marks on the body, and we jump to the conclusion that the person has committed a murder, and his motivation was sexual. He had a sexual motivation for committing the murder. So sexual motivation is not actually the motivation in the sense of the life course theory of serial killing. It is the purpose. He committed the rape as the purpose. So he did it and he wanted to get sex of that woman. Not all the people who want sex will attack a woman and will be very aggressive, and some will try to fall in love, or some will try to do something else for getting sex. Some will get married, and not all those people who want to have sex will murder a woman or try to have sex with a woman forcefully. So there is a lot of input we need from the life of that person and from his born characteristic to determine why he exactly committed that particular crime. So most often police officers refers to the motivation. When they say motivation, they mean actually the purpose, not actually the motivation. Yes, of course, if a woman's cloth is gone and her body is identified with a lot of marks on or impressions on her body, that means the purpose for that crime will be sex, but not the motivation of the offender. Motivation is more complicated and there is more in it. And then all arguments that serial killers are either made by nature or by nurture are immature, since both closely related and most times cannot be differentiated. That means when we say someone is that way by birth, or or by his circumstances. This argument has some basic fundamental problem, because the bone structure of a person is constantly in reaction with the environment in which he lives. So these two cannot be differentiated. Whatever happens in the environment is again creating new structures inside his brain. And if you study a 40-year-old serial killer, and you after his death we study his brain, and when you cut open his brain you find a different structure compared to the general population. And if you are making an argument that this brain structure is the reason why he committed the murder, what is the surety that this brain structure is not caused by the deviant life he had? Because brain is constantly changing, and when you are attending to this lecture, your brain is making new connections with the informations which I am providing you. That means your brain is different after this lecture compared to the one you had it before. So this kind of nature-nurture argument on which criminology thrived during the initial period of its development cannot explain violent offenses such as serial killing in future. So this theory is not promoting a nature or nurture. If you are asking me like whether serial killers are made or they are born, that question is not a matured one to address the motivation for serial killing. Then the third one is most factor oriented approach cannot effectively explain the motivation for serial killing, since there are many examples of individuals with criminogenic factors in life evolve into peaceful, law-abiding individuals. So this one I already explained before this slide. That means factor-oriented approach cannot effectively explain the motivation, because people with such factors, similar to those factors in the life of serial killers, sometimes grow up and be law-abiding individuals, very peaceful, very helpful. So in that kind of situation, we cannot exactly say that this person is a serial killer because of these factors. What you're looking at is the motivation for the definition which I have given. If you understand this, it is very easy to understand my research. So my entire research can be summarized by this slide. So this is how I define the motivation of a person who commit serial killing. So motivation is defined as the nature of a person and the deep resting life factors. That means there are two components. One is the nature of a person, something which he is born with, or something which he developed in the initial years of his life. And then there are deep resting life factors which are not inherent, but there are certain situations which he is born into. That is what is called deep resting life factors. So these two things are very important in the making of a person into anything, not just serial killers. So nature of a person and the deep resting life factors, these complex interactions through various key incidences which predispose the person with a killer instinct. So the next thing is, these nature and deep resting life factors, they interact through key incidents or critical incidents. A person getting married, that marriage can be a key incident. A person stop going to school in a very young age, and later those incidents had some kind of chain of incidents starting from it, then that will become a key incident or a critical incident. A person's mother or father died when he was very young or when he was old, and he was deeply impacted by it, and that resulted in so many psychological issues for him, then that can also be a key incident. So when these key incidents in all of our life, there are key incidents. You can say like, what is the turning point of your life? At what point of time you decided to marry this person, or study this particular course which took your life to a entirely new career, new area. So these are all key incidents. So serial killers are also just like us, and they have key incidences in their life. And when the key incidences happens, the nature and deep lusting life factors interact with each other, and then a person who commit a serial killing need to have a killer instinct. That means, a person with a killer instinct, if he reached a breaking point, he commits murder. That means a person with a killer instinct, if he reach a breaking point, he commits murder. So even there are many people who reach the killer instinct still will not commit the murder. But a person with a killer instinct is a potential serial killer. He can commit a murder at any time, and he can continue doing it. So this killer instinct can be achieved with the interaction of deep lusting life factors, and I used to call it DRLF in my study and in the following conversation. DRLF and nature, they interact through various key incidences in the life of a person, and then when he attains a killer instinct, he is like a ticking time bomb. It may blast any time, and then this instinct, the killer instinct, can go up and down just like in a graph, like a hologram or something. It can go up, it can go down. Sometimes he will have higher killer instinct, sometimes he will have lesser killer instinct, but he has a tendency to get aggressive almost all the time, and then eventually it will result in serial killing. For the resulting of serial killing, there is something called trigger, and I will come to that point later.